50 Cent just cracked open a case that the music industry has spent nearly 3 decades duct taping shut, and the secrets spilling out are darker, louder, and nastier than anything the world was ready for. Because apparently, Biggie and Tupac's deaths weren't just tragedies, they were ticking time bombs of lies, backroom deals, backstabbers, and billion-dollar egos that never wanted the truth to see daylight. But here we are. And 50 Cent? He just detonated the whole thing on camera. So now the internet is asking the question nobody ever had the nerve to say out loud: what if the stories we were fed were never real? What if the people we trusted the most were the ones pulling the darkest strings? Why is 50 suddenly dragging Biggie, Tupac, and the puppet masters behind them into the spotlight again? Why are old tapes, old deals, old secrets resurfacing like ghosts refusing to stay buried? And most importantly, why does this feel like the piece of the puzzle that was never supposed to be found? Because if 50 Cent's claims are even half true, then the entire narrative behind hip-hop's biggest losses is about to collapse. Buckle up. This story starts with a whisper and ends like an explosion. From the moment 50 Cent opened his mouth and dropped those first icy words, the entire industry froze like someone just cut the lights in a room full of guilty people. Because the second he said he had new disturbing details about Biggie and Tupac's deaths, the energy shifted. Conversations stopped. Backrooms went quiet. Phones started buzzing like they were overheating from panic. And suddenly, everyone who used to laugh off these rumors wasn't laughing anymore. They were looking over their shoulders, wondering who 50 was about to expose next, and that's exactly where it all begins, with this uncomfortable truth that nobody in power wants to touch. Every time Biggie and Tupac's names resurface, somebody in the industry starts sweating hard, because these deaths weren't just random tragedies. They were events wrapped in layers of secrets, street politics, executive silence, and the kind of behind-the-scenes chaos that even Hollywood wouldn't dare script. And 50 Cent? He's not just poking at the hornet's nest, he's ripping it open with both hands. He starts by pointing straight at the one name the industry never once spoken too loudly. The man whose shadow sits over every rumor, every theory, every conspiracy, Diddy, or, as 50 calls him now, Sean Combs, because once the lawsuits started dropping and the walls started shaking, even the name Diddy became too shiny for the mess surrounding him. And according to 50, the problem isn't just that people think Diddy is connected to Tupac's death. The problem is that Diddy's name pops up so often in the conversation that it has practically become a permanent character in the story, and 50 doesn't stop there. He takes it further. He says if Diddy was ever put in a situation where he had to stand strong in a murder-for-hire case, it would collapse instantly. Because according to 50, the money, the motives, the connections, none of it holds up clean. Everything gets blurry. Everything contradicts itself. Everything falls apart. And that's exactly why he believes Diddy will never own up or speak openly about anything connected to that night in Las Vegas. And the wild this video? 50 isn't pulling these claims out of thin air. He's pulling them from the one man whose name has become synonymous with the Tupac case, Dwayne "Kefty" Davis, a man who once claimed Diddy offered him $1 million to take Tupac out, then later backtracked, then got arrested, then denied parts again, then somehow ended up facing trial anyway. How does someone keep dancing around the same fire without getting burned? Unless there's something bigger happening behind the scenes. Something that keeps the truth tied up and gagged, while the industry pretends everything is just rumors. But that's the problem. The rumors never die. They circle back every few years like they're on a timer. Someone talks, someone slips, someone uploads a forgotten clip, someone gets arrested, someone drops a confession that disappears the next week. And it always leads back to the same handful of people, the same stories, the same contradictions. It's a loop that refuses to break. So when 50 Cent released his documentary and positioned himself front and center as the man brave enough to call out these secrets, it hit the culture like a bomb. Because 50 isn't scared of anybody. Not power, not fame, not lawyers, not labels. And in this documentary, he shows that clearly. He puts allegedly recorded calls, leaked conversations, hidden footage, and insider claims right in front of the audience and says, "Here, this is what everyone's been whispering about." And suddenly the internet was like, wait, what did we just hear? Because in the documentary, the claims are wild. Not only does it suggest conversations between Diddy and Kef D took place, it suggests that there were moments where people were discussing things they had no business discussing. Moments where motives start to sound like instructions. Moments where coincidence suddenly smells a lot like planning, and the craziest this video? 50 doesn't even act shocked in the documentary. He talks like someone who already knew the truth but was waiting for the right time to drop it in the world's lap. Like he had been sitting on this secret waiting for the moment the industry was weak enough to face it. He even says the reason he chose to produce this documentary was because the story grew bigger than any rumor, bigger than any beef, bigger than any interview. It became a conversation that was happening everywhere, on podcasts, in barbershops, in studios, in online threads. A conversation people were too scared to have openly, but too curious to ignore. And 50? He didn't want to run from that. He wanted to run straight into it, and that's exactly where things start getting messy. Because once those tapes were shown, once those claims resurfaced, once those connections were laid out on screen, suddenly everything people thought they knew about Biggie and Tupac's deaths shifted. And everyone started asking the same question. If this is what 50 is showing us publicly, what does he know privately? And that's where this video ends, with 50 Cent cracking the door open, and everyone else realizing the room behind. It is much darker than they ever imagined, because the moment 50 Cent cracked that door open, the panic didn't stay behind the scenes anymore. It spilled out into the public like a leak nobody could stop. Suddenly, every blogger, every podcaster, every hip-hop historian, every conspiracy theorist, every old head who swore he knew someone who knew someone back in the day came crawling out with their version of the truth. It was chaos. Digital chaos. And the funny this video? The louder people tried to shout their explanations, the more suspicious the whole thing looked, because when a story is clean, people don't panic. When a story is simple, people don't scramble. But when a story is messy, toxic, tainted, and stitched together with nervous lies, suddenly everyone wants to defend themselves before anyone even accuses them. And that is exactly what started happening. It was like 50 Cent didn't just release a documentary. He pulled the fire alarm in an industry full of people hiding gasoline. But the biggest shock wasn't the public reaction. It was the reaction from inside the music world. People who were normally loud, messy, dramatic, unfiltered suddenly got quiet, uncomfortably quiet. That silence said more than any statement ever could. Because silence doesn't come from innocence. Silence comes from fear. Fear of what 50 has in his vault. Fear of what else he might expose. Fear of who might get dragged into the spotlight next. And this is where the so-called leaks started surfacing, conveniently timed, suspiciously worded, impossible to verify, but too detailed to ignore. Anonymous insiders claiming there were phone records that never made it to court. Unreleased police notes from the Vegas investigation. Lawyers who supposedly whispered that certain names were protected by people with too much money, too much influence, and too many connections to ever let the truth come out. These leaks didn't solve anything. They just added gasoline to the fire. One anonymous former consultant even claimed that certain labels back then had more to gain from Tupac's death than people realized. Another said that some high-ranking executives celebrated Biggie's murder because it wiped certain debts, erased certain deals, and cleared the way for new artists who were easier to control. Were these claims real? Nobody knows. But they were viral. And that's all it took. Because in the online world, perception spreads faster than truth, but the most disturbing leak came from someone who claimed to have worked in the security side of the industry. Someone who swore there were classified level connections between law enforcement and certain music moguls in the 90s. According to this source, some operations were too big to expose because they were intertwined with government agendas. Now, whether that's real or fictional, who knows? But when you pair that with the fact that Biggie's case has been cold for decades and Tupac's case has gone through more rumors than evidence, suddenly that claim doesn't sound as impossible as it should. And then there were the fan theories, loud, messy, dramatic, and sometimes so crazy they were almost believable. People were connecting dots the way the internet always does, aggressively, confidently, and with zero hesitation. They dug up old interviews, slowed down audio clips, pulled old articles, found old grainy footage, compared timelines, cross-referenced statements, and built giant digital murder boards, like they were auditioning for a Netflix documentary of their own. But the strongest theory, the one that was spreading like wildfire, was the idea that both murders weren't isolated events, that they weren't random shootings, that they weren't just the result of East Coast versus West Coast beef. The theory was that these killings were this video of something bigger, something orchestrated, something layered with motives that reached far beyond the streets. And people were starting to say it out loud. Maybe the music moguls weren't just involved. Maybe they were the architects, and who sits at the center of all these theories? The same person 50 Cent keeps pointing at. The person whose name keeps circling back no matter how many times he rebrands or reinvents himself. Because Diddy isn't just a celebrity. He is an empire. An institution. A brand built on influence, money, and connections. And according to these theories, that kind of power comes with shadows, long shadows, and then, almost perfectly timed, a new claim surfaced. One that said there were recordings, not the ones shown in the documentary, but private recordings still locked away. Conversations between people who should have never been talking to each other. Conversations that suggested deals, arrangements, and warnings. Conversations that hinted that certain people were being protected not because they were innocent, but because exposing them would unravel too. Many threads at once. And this is where the public reaction went from curiosity to obsession. Viewers started analyzing 50 Cent himself, his interviews, his posts, his captions. They were looking for clues like he was speaking in code. Some people even said he had been hinting at this for years, but nobody paid attention. Others said he was doing this because he was tired of the industry's silence. And then there were people who said something even bolder, maybe 50 Cent survived this industry because he knew exactly who not to mess with. And now he's finally ready to talk, and that's the exact energy this video ends on. The world hunting for clues. The industry hiding behind silence. And 50 Cent standing in the middle with a story that's getting darker by the minute. Those leaked audio files didn't just expose Diddy, they exposed an entire ecosystem built behind his public image. In the background of the recordings, you could hear laughter, whispers, coded phrases, and the kind of strategic planning that didn't sound like one man covering his tracks. It sounded like a coordinated operation. And the wildest, this video? The voices in the audio allegedly belonged to people who had worked with him for years, partners, collaborators, even friends who enjoyed the luxuries and spotlight he gave them. One voice in the audio said, "Just make sure the press doesn't get anything. She knows too much. Keep her away until it dies down." And instantly the world wanted to know, who is she? 3 names began circulating: an ex-assistant, a model, and a reality star. But nobody confirmed anything. All anyone knew was that these recordings were real, they were raw, and they showed fear behind the scenes. But the biggest question everyone asked was this: if Diddy had so much control, how did someone manage to leak this? That's when things took an unexpected turn. A former security guard speaking anonymously revealed that Diddy's inner circle had already begun cracking months before the scandal went public. He claimed people close to Diddy were secretly recording conversations, saving messages, and collecting proof. Not for justice, but for survival, for leverage, for insurance. Once that statement hit the internet, Hollywood completely fractured. Celebrities who once stood proudly next to Diddy started distancing themselves at lightning speed. Some deleted old photos. Some removed interviews where they praised him. And others simply posted 2 words: no comment. But the more silent they became, the louder the public suspicions grew. Then an even bigger bomb dropped. A leaked email thread surfaced showing discussions between Diddy's reps and certain media outlets. The subject line alone made everyone freeze. 72-hour cover option. Inside the email, one chilling sentence stood out: "We can bury the story for 72 hours if the transfer clears tonight." 3 days of silence. 3 days of protection. And the price? More than most people will earn in their lifetime, the internet erupted. If you can buy silence for 3 days, how many stories have been buried forever? And that question changed the entire trajectory of the scandal. Suddenly, it wasn't just about Diddy, it was about a system. Just when the internet thought the saga couldn't escalate further, a whistleblower stepped in and flipped the entire narrative on its head. They leaked not just emails but encrypted videos with file names so coded that forensic teams spent days trying to access them. And when they finally cracked them open, everything changed. In one of the decoded clips, an unidentified celebrity name still sealed by the court was seen sitting with Diddy in a dimly lit room. On the table were legal papers. In the background, a whiteboard filled with dates, initials, arrows, and symbols. They weren't discussing damage control, they were discussing strategy. A cleanup plan. This wasn't rumor. This wasn't speculation. This looked organized. Investigators immediately realized this wasn't a one-man scandal. This was a network. Public reaction went nuclear. Fans were in disbelief, critics were celebrating, and neutral people suddenly became analysts overnight. Old clips resurfaced. Interviews were dissected. Body language experts flooded the internet. Everyone was searching for the truth in every blink, every smile, every handshake Diddy ever made. But the questions kept piling up. Would Diddy be arrested? Would this turn into a RICO case? Would high-ranking Hollywood figures fall with him? Right when theories reached their peak, an unknown lawyer released a statement that stopped the entire internet cold. What you're seeing is only 10% of what exists. 10%. If only a fraction of the truth had leaked, what was in the remaining 90? Who else was involved? Which celebrities had benefited from Diddy's influence? Which ones helped protect him? And how many were still silent because they had everything to lose? This was the moment the scandal shifted from entertainment gossip to a dark, terrifying revelation. The corruption revealed so far was only the surface, and whatever was underneath. Nobody was ready for and now the only question left is this: after everything that leaked, everything exposed, and everything still hiding in the shadows, do you really think this story ends here? Because every sign, every whisper, every anonymous tip says the opposite. This is the calm before the real explosion. The truth isn't just trickling out anymore. It's cracking open from the inside, and whatever comes next is going to rewrite the entire narrative. These powerful people spent decades building so before the next leak hits, before the next insider cracks under pressure, before another shocking file drops out of nowhere, you need to tell me what you think. Do you believe these networks were protecting each other? Do you think the secrets go deeper than anyone imagined? And most importantly, do you think more names are going to fall? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading everything. Hit that like button if you want this video, and every truth they're trying to bury. Subscribe if you want the next update the second it breaks, because when the next bombshell drops, trust me, you'll want to be right here when it does. The story isn't over. It's just beginning.